Hello, everyone. Welcome to Step by Step through the FAFSA. We're super excited to have Jason Anderson here with us tonight, our college and career expert, to share with us some of these awesome tips about breaking down the FAFSA into small, bite-sized, easy to understand pieces so you can submit that application easily and get any grants and award from your university or college of choice and move on through your school year. Wow. I'm Rhiannon Johnson, and I am the Career Resources Specialist at the Kansas City Public Library. And so I'm super excited to welcome Jason. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Jason.
Yeah, thanks so much. I've been doing this for several years for Kansas City Public Library, and I've done similar presentations for really all of the libraries locally here in the Kansas City area. And I've also liked seeing this get posted online and reach a lot of people, help many individuals fill out the FAFSA, because what we know from statistics is that a lot of people decide not to fill it out, and it leaves millions of dollars of financial aid on the table for people who need it, that need that aid to get to college and to get the degree that they need to get the job that they want. So really excited to be back and presenting some of this information. And we've got over 100 slides to go through, believe it or not. Now, don't let that scare you. It goes pretty smoothly, but we've just got a lot of stuff to cover. So before we get into that, I do want to say that I wear several hats in my life, okay? And one of those hats is the owner of Gradmetrics, where I do college and student loan planning. But a big hat that I wear, and really my main hat in life, is I'm full-time faculty at the University of Kansas. And so in that role, the University of Kansas wants me to tell people when I'm in that capacity versus something else. And in this presentation, I am in my capacity as Gradmetrics, so don't think I'm representing KU. Okay, so we're going to cover financial aid because we really can't understand the FAFSA without understanding why we fill it out in the first place. Then we're going to talk about student loans, which are part of the FAFSA and some of the money that you can get to go to college. And then we'll finally go through what you're all here for, which is step by step through the FAFSA, talk about some of the main sections where I see families mess up, and how you can avoid some of those pitfalls as we go along. So let's talk financial aid first. So what is offered through the FAFSA? Well, the FAFSA has free money, which is money that doesn't have to be paid back at any point. And those are grants, is what we call that class of money. And specifically, if you're looking for grants, it would be the Pell Grant is one of the ones that is really well known, but it could be the Teach Grant, it could be other grants. You're also offered scholarships through the FAFSA, which technically the government is not going to give you scholarships. We call that money grants. But what happens is when you fill out the FAFSA, the information that you put into the FAFSA and the schools that you list on the FAFSA will eventually get this information that you've input. And essentially, now they're not going to get all that information per se, but they're going to get your indication of financial need, and they're going to take that and put together a financial aid package for you. And typically, a piece of that financial aid package, especially if you're going to a private school, are going to be some type of scholarship, some type of scholarship offering. Then we have work study, which is when the government pays for your student to work on campus, and they're essentially subsidizing that job. And then we have federal student loans, which have been in the news recently because of Biden's plans around federal student loans. But those can come in a number of different flavors. We're going to talk about those as we go along. Then you have private student loans and private scholarships. These aren't going to come from the FAFSA. You might go to a financial institution out there and get a student loan, or go to a scholarship search like Scally or Peterson's or whatever that looks like for you, try to get private scholarships. But I can tell you specifically, private scholarships are a pretty small portion of the funding pie for college. And so it may be worthwhile for you, it may not. But really filling out the FAFSA is worthwhile for pretty much every family that fills it out. And I'm going to talk about some of the misconceptions, because some people don't think they need to fill it out because they maybe make too much money. And even those families a lot of times can be in a better place by filling out the FAFSA than if they didn't. So some of the aid that comes from the FAFSA is need-based, meaning that you're demonstrating need, you fill out the FAFSA, you log your income and your assets, and the government essentially says you have financial need for college. So you might get Pell Grants, again, money that doesn't have to be paid back. You might get the FSEOG grant, You might get subsidized loans. You might get work study. All these are based on need. And a subsidized loan means that the government is paying for the interest while you're in school. Now, you'll eventually have to pay interest when you exit school and exit your grace period, but you're not going to have to pay for interest while you're in school. So that is a perk that's offered on some of these loans. And you can get need that's not, or you can get aid that's not based on need. And that would be like a direct unsubsidized loan or a federal plus loan if you have, if you're demonstrating need between all the aid that you've been given and everything that, or the full cost of attendance at the school. You might also get grants that aren't based on need, like the Teach grant, if you're going to teach, which would be a grant that would be a grant forever as long as you meet the qualifications. Otherwise, it flips to a loan. So how much can you get? Well, Pell Grants right now are about $7,000 per year. And a lot of times if you get a Pell Grant, what will happen is you'll be issued a Pell Grant by the government. A lot of times the school will have matching funds for the Pell Grant. So that you can be in a really good place if you end up getting Pell Grants. You can see some of the other levels here for some of the other grants and loans that I've talked about. And in particular, we're going to talk about how much you'll get in loans if you're a dependent student. And we're going to also talk about what it means to be a dependent student in terms of the FAFSA. And I just want to bring this to your attention from the get-go. Being dependent is not being dependent in terms of a tax return, okay? That's a different concept. When I say dependent or independent, we're talking in terms of the FAFSA's criteria, not in terms of tax, okay? So make sure you know that distinction in your mind. All right, so now we're going to talk student loans. So student loans, well, how much are we going to take out and how much are we going to end up paying? Well, the average student loan, the payment for someone exiting higher education in the United States, about $400 a month. Now, I can tell you this can go sky high compared to this if you're taking out a lot of Parent Plus loans or you're a professional degree holder that's going to take out a bunch of loans for med school. But this is what the average is. So I just wanted to put that on your radar. That's what the average person is going to expect to pay per month when they exit. Now, there are two types of student loans. There's federal student loans, which is really what we're focusing on here because we're talking about the FAFSA. And then there are private student loans. These come from lenders like a bank or a credit union, some other financial institution. When we talk federal student loans, there are really three types. And so the first two types are direct subsidized loans. And then we have direct unsubsidized loans. Again, the difference being if the government is paying for your interest while you're in school, and also if you demonstrate financial need in the FAFSA. Now, when we talk about a dependent student, and these two columns are dependent students versus independent students, but most of you that are on this call are likely here because you have a senior. Well, I've done enough of these that I know a lot of people watch these because they're parents of a senior in high school. And in most cases, that is going to be a dependent student scenario. So I'm going to focus on the dependent student scenario throughout this presentation because that's typically who watches this. So if we think about dependent students, like a senior in high school that's going off to college, they're going to take out, if they take out federal student loans that come under their name, they're actually capped at the amount that they can take out. So first year, it's going to be $5,500. Second year, it's going to be $6,500. Subsequent years, it's going to be $7,500. And you're actually capped at $31,000. Excuse me. Let me take a drink of water here. So the amount that someone is able to take out is going to be limited. Okay, like they're not going to be able to take out an unlimited amount of money. And this is one of the main questions that I hear from families is they say, hey, Jason, I want my kid to take all the debt. I don't want to do anything. I don't want a Parent Plus loan. I don't want to help them out. I want this to be something that they do. And in most cases, you're not going to be able to do it. Simply now, there is a path to do it. Like if you went to Metropolitan Community College, you transferred to a cheap state school, maybe you could make your $31,000 work, especially if you're staying at home. But if you're living on campus at a four-year institution, you're going off to Mizzou, you're going off to K-State, KU, right now that's going to be about $120,000 over 4 years. And so this isn't enough money to make that happen. So again, keep that in mind when you're thinking about the FAFSA and thinking about what your child might be able to do. This is actually a perfect segue to the next slide. So what happens is since A dependent student is limited in the amount of debt that they can take out. A lot of times what we'll see is a parent will be offered a Parent Plus loan, and they'll take out Parent Plus loans on behalf of their kid. So those loans go in the parent's name, not the student's name, and they're able to supplement that extra cost the student is taking on that they can't take out enough debt to cover themselves. Now, one of the things I want you to be aware of there is that when your student takes out one of those direct subsidized or unsubsidized loans, they're going to be taking them out at current interest rates of about 5%. Then you have graduate and professional borrowers. So if they go off to med school or law school, they are likely going to be taking out about 6.5%. By the way, these change every year. So they're fixed interest rates, but they're going to change every summer. And so likely these will change, and my guess is they will increase by the time you all go off, your kids go off to school or you go off to school in this next coming year. Then Parent Plus loans are even higher interest rates, 7.5%. Well, roughly, I'm rounding these numbers, but 7.54%. And by the way, these have a 1% origination fee. So the servicer is going to take that 1%. And I say 1%, but again, I'm rounding. It's a little more than 1%. It's going to be about a 1% origination fee here. They're going to take that off the top when they disperse the loan. Here, it's over 4%. Okay. So this is not only a higher interest rate, it's also a higher fee when they disperse it to you. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, so we've covered financial aid, we've covered student loans, and so now we get to talk about the FAFSA. Oh, sorry, I went back, not forward. Okay, this is what I want to talk about first. So if you've covered, or if you've read the news over the last couple of years, you've maybe read some articles about big changes coming to the FAFSA, that it was going to be simplified, that it was going to go from like 150 questions to 35. The good thing is that's still coming, but not this year, okay? We thought it was going to be this year, and it ended up being delayed to next year. At least that's what we know for now. So there haven't really been any changes. If you watched, well, I say no changes. There have been a few changes, which I've outlined here on the slide, but mostly not really a lot of change. So if you filled it out last year, you're going to recognize the form. It's going to be the same thing. However, I want you to know that you should expect to see very different FAFSA and many changes for the next FAFSA cycle. And what happens is you fill out the FAFSA once, you're likely going to fill it out once a year for every year that you're a kid or you are in college. So just know that this is probably the most difficult FAFSA this year that you're going to fill out, and it's going to get a lot easier as you go forward. So here's the homepage. Let's talk FAFSA and let's walk through it. This is the homepage. This is how you get to the FAFSA, and this URL is studentaid.gov, studentaid.gov. Okay, and that's where you get to the FAFSA. So when you go to studentaid.gov and you get to this homepage, you'll see up here it says FAFSA form in this top menu, and so you'll click on that. It will take you, and you can see here's the drop down. So you'll say complete the FAFSA form, and then it will take you to the home page for the FAFSA. And there's going to be two options for you. You can either select start here as a new person. And so again, if you're helping a senior in high school fill it out for the first year of college, you're going to both be new users. You're going to start here. But if you're a returning user, you're filling it out for a sophomore, or you warp ahead to your future self, you're likely going to be selecting that you're a returning user using that FSA ID that you've set up and going through that portal. Now, when you click one of those two, it's going to ask you, what are you, or who are you? One is that you're a student, that you're filling it out. And really, you've got to keep in mind that the Department of Education, in their mind, this is a student form. So some of the parents that I work with get confused about that. They think, oh, well, I'm going to pay for my kid's education. I'm filling it out. I'm filling out the FAFSA. Well, no, this is always the student's form, because your students really, they're exiting high school, they're becoming an adult. And so what's happening is the Department of Education is saying, no, this is the student form. And so another option is you can say, I'm a parent filling out a FAFSA form for a student. And so what happens here, if you click this, you have to actually verify some additional information about the student, and then you're able to access the form. But again, you're kind of a visitor in your student's FAFSA, okay? So just keep that in mind. Another reason that you need to keep this in mind is because all the questions in the FAFSA are geared towards the student. they're all asking questions of the student. So when the FAFSA asks, do you want to input your parents' information? It's asking about the parents, not the parents' parents, okay? It's always asking through the eyes of the student because this is a student form. And then the final one is do you have a preparer that's helping you fill out the form? And by the way, I'm not a preparer for you. A preparer is somebody that you pay to help you fill out the FAFSA, and I'm just here giving a workshop for free. So don't list me on the FAFSA, okay? I'm not your preparer. So finally, if you're a student and you selected that, you're going to log in with an FSA ID. What is an FSA ID? That is your kind of key to get into the FAFSA. It is also your electronic signature to sign it at the end. So you'll need your FSA ID to get in and then also to sign. So the student will always have to set that up at all times because, again, it's a student form. They're going to have to enter and sign it. Parents, you will have to sign it. You will have to sign it as well if you're inputting parent financial information, which again, I'm focusing on a dependent student scenario here. And that is the scenario where parents will have to input financial information. So they're going to have to set up an FSA ID as well, which again, you can set up at this create FSA ID. And you're both going to have your own FSA ID. And that's simply because you're signing for your own financial information. If you're a parent, you have to have your own electronic signature. Okay, so if you select that you're a parent, you're going to, again, have to verify things about your student in order to get access to the form and then sign in. So once you get into the form, it's going to say, hey, you're ready to start the form. Now, I'm going to, throughout this presentation, I'm going to tell you certain areas of the FAFSA where people screw up, okay? And this is the first one. So the first way that you can screw up is by submitting the wrong FAFSA, okay? And this is a huge headache and you don't want to do it. So let me tell you how to avoid this. How you can avoid this is think about what's the academic year that my kid is going to go to school, or what's the academic year that I'm going to go to school. So what's our current academic year? Like I said, I teach in higher ed. So I'm teaching the current academic year, I'm teaching classes. And so what is the academic year that I'm currently teaching in as of it's happening right now? Well, it's 2022, and it's 2023 because the academic year starts in the fall, so fall of 2022, and I'm going to end my academic year in May of spring 2023. So that's academic year. But think about it. If you're the typical person who's watching this recording and your senior student is going off to college, when are they going to college? What's the academic year in which they're going to enter school? Well, they're going to go into school in fall 2023, and they're going to exit in spring of 2024. So if you think about the academic year, that is the name of the FAFSA that you need to fill out. So if you were going to fill out a current year FAFSA, as in you were going to school now, you were filling it out to get aid now, you would be filling out the 2023-2024 FAFSA, or sorry, 2022-2023 FAFSA. But your senior year student is going to be going to school in 2023-2024. And so they're going to select this one. So this is an area that people mess up all the time. You need to select the one that your kid is going to school. So for most of you, if you have a senior year student, it's going to be 2023-2024, okay? Not this one. This is the current year. All right, and then it's going to ask for a save key. A save key is just a numeric code. And if you have any questions about how to actually create a save key or what is a save key, you can click this little icon. But it's a numeric code. I believe it's 4 to 8 digits that you're going to randomly make up and write down, hopefully on a sticky note, so that if you get kicked out of the FAFSA, you don't lose all your information before you submit it. So that's what the save key is for. You'll have to set that up. And then it's going to give you a frequently asked questions. You're welcome to read through some of this. And then again, I'm going to be covering a dependent student scenario. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to go through the FAFSA and we're going to fill out, since we're talking about a dependent student scenario, we're going to fill out parent demographics and parent financials. Again, if you're a graduate student, you already have a bachelor's degree, you're going to be an independent student. And that means you're not going to have to list your parents' financial information. So for instance, I fill out the FAFSA because I'm a PhD student. And when I go to fill out the FAFSA, I don't list my parents' financial information, okay? I'm classified as an independent student. But we're going to talk about a dependent student, which means we're putting parent financial information in the form. So here is the FAFSA. You can see that we have the first section we're going to have to tackle is student demographics. Then we're going to go to school selection. then dependency status, then parent demographics and parent financials, then student financials, and then we'll sign and submit. So we're going to walk through each of these as we go along. Okay, first is student demographics. And what is this? It's student demographic information. So you're going to start with social security number, first name, middle initial, last name, date of birth. And again, this is all for the student. Then we're going to move on to an email address. And here I would encourage you to use an email address that your student is going to continue to use going into college. This shouldn't be like their Blue Valley email address or their Lee Summit email address. This should be one that's going to be permanent and moving with the student. So put in the email address, telephone number. Then we're going to go to permanent mailing address here. And after this, it's going to ask if they've lived at that residence for at least 5 or in the state. So you just put in an address and it's going to strip that address from or strip the state from the address that you just put in there. It's going to say if you live there for at least 5 years. Some people are confused by this question, but it makes sense if you think of in-state tuition. So for state schools like Mizzou, KU, K-State, what happens is they're going to charge the residents of their own state a lower tuition than somebody that would come from California, for instance. We call that in-state and out-of-state tuition. The same thing if somebody were to go from Missouri to Iowa, and they're going to go to Iowa State, they're likely going to pay an out-of-state tuition. And this is just schools that are funded by the state, incentivizing their own citizens to use those taxpayer dollars. So why is the FAFSA asking this question? Well, because they need to figure out if somebody's a resident or not in order to calculate what the cost of attendance is going to be. And so if you've lived in the state for 5 years, this is kind of a catch-all for typically that means you're a resident, right? It may vary from that depending on your situation, but that's why the FAFSA asks this question, all right? Then we're going to do citizenship status. And I can tell you U.S. citizen is the main one that's going to be selected here, but you can get financial aid if you're not a U.S. citizen, if you have a certain status in the United States. And if you have any questions about that, you can click on this little question help icon, and you can read all about those different statuses and if you're eligible for financial aid. Then we're going to do student education. So you're likely going to pick, high school diploma, or you might pick another status like GED. Then you're going to move on and say, what am I going to get in terms of a degree? So why am I going to college? It might be an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a graduate degree. You're going to select that here. All right, so this is the second place where I see a lot of people mess up, okay? So this is flag number 2, and it's where it says, what will your college grade level be when you begin the 2023-2024 school year? And I do know that I work with some families that they've taken their students have taken a lot of dual credit, they've taken AP, they've taken CLEP test, and so when they go off to college, they're going to be technically a sophomore in terms of credits. Well, here you're still going to select first year, never attended college first year. You're not going to select sophomore. So that's another kind of mistake that I see a lot of families do, is they'll say, oh, well, my kid's a sophomore in credits, so I'm going to pick sophomore here. No, don't do that. Do never attended college first year if they're moving from high school going on to college at this point. And then it finally says, confusingly, I don't know why, if you're interested in being considered for work study. You could select no, but there's just no reason not to say yes, because you cannot accept work study down the line. If I were in your seat, I would want to know if I qualified for it, so I would just select yes here. Then there's driver's license, which you don't have to put this information in. This one's actually an elective question. And then it's going to say, it's going to ask if you were in the foster care system. So that's a question that you're going to have to ask, and that has some dependency implications in terms of whether you're classified as dependent or independent. And then it's going to ask some statistical questions about your parents. What was their highest level of education that they completed? And this won't affect your financial aid. And we're done with the first section. So now we get to move on to school selection. All right, so for school selection, the first thing that your student has to do is select their high school. And I just tell people this is kind of a database. You're going to be looking things up in a database. So what you do is you just select your state, and the city and that the high school is in, and then in the drop down, you're going to select the high school name. So pretty easy. Just do state, city, and then you'll pick the drop down. So you'll see what that drop down looks like here. You'll pick whatever that high school is, and you'll move on. You'll confirm, and then we'll move on to selecting the colleges. So the colleges is your school list. Where is your student going to go off to school? And again, you're going to select those by putting a state, a city, and then selecting that college from a drop down. Now, before we go any further, there's a couple scenarios here that I get questions on. One is, what if my student doesn't know where they want to go to school? I would not let that delay you filling out the FAFSA, okay? So they could select just maybe a state school that's close to them, whatever that looks like, but don't let that delay you actually filling out the FAFSA. The second thing is, what if my student has like 15 schools that they want to apply to? Well, you can only select 10 at one time. So what you need to do in that scenario is you need to select their top 10. You need to put those 10 schools in the FAFSA, and then it will say you can't add anymore. And so you fill out the FAFSA, you sign and submit it. It will eventually process in about 2 to 3 days. And then you can go back in and add and remove schools. But you can only do 10 at one time, but you can put in that full 15. You just have to submit it and then go back and modify those schools at a later time. And I should also say at this point, the reason why you can do that is because once the FAFSA submits, your information goes off to those schools. And so you can make modifications at that time, whereas you wouldn't be able to before that time. So you're going to select the school, and then you can select if you're going to live on campus, off campus. Again, this helps the school calculate the full cost of attendance for whatever your housing arrangements are. And that's it. We're done with another section. So those two are pretty easy. Not any problems there in most instances. And I can tell you dependency status is pretty easy as well. So what is this section doing? This section, again, you're dependent or independent in terms of the criteria of the FAFSA. And so these are those questions that are those criteria. So you're going to go through and you're going to answer, what's your marital status? Why do you answer that? Because if you're married, you're actually considered independent in terms of the FAFSA. It's going to ask, will you have children who receive more of half of their support from you? Well, guess what? If you do, you're going to be considered independent. But again, you don't need to know how it's going to classify these things. You just need to answer the questions. And then the FAFSA is going to classify you as dependent or independent. So here's dependence. Also a question you're going to have to ask, or you're going to have to answer that the FAFSA asks. And then we have some, I guess, more rare pieces here that are like check boxes. And so you'll have to check one of these boxes if they apply to you, and not if they don't, you'll do none of the above. But this is like if you're a veteran, for instance. If you're a veteran, you're also considered independent in terms of the FAFSA. So you'll just go through each of these and see if they are in line with your situation. It's also going to ask if you're homeless. So if you are homeless or you're self-supporting at the risk of being homeless, then you would select yes here. And I believe, I've never worked with anybody that has selected yes on this question, but I believe there's some documentation pieces to answering yes to this question, but it does ask you if you're homeless. And then at this point, it's gonna categorize you as dependent or independent in terms of the FAFSA. And if it's dependent, which again, this is the scenario that I'm using here, it's going to ask you if you want to provide information about your parents. Now, if you're a dependent student, in terms of the FAFSA, you have to provide parental financial information. So this isn't like an elective question, okay? You could select that I'm unable to provide information. It's gonna essentially limit your ability to get financial aid. So most dependent students are gonna say, well, yeah, I'm gonna provide my parents financial information, and they're gonna move on. So it is a question that's asked, but again, there are some ramifications to saying no. And we're through another section. Now we're going to move on to parent demographics, and guess what? It's not wildly different from student demographics. And so most of these questions are going to be similar. There are a few differences though that I want to talk through. So the first is actually, it's outlined here because so many families have had issues with trying to figure out how to fill out the FAFSA if they're a mixed family or a divorced family, that they've actually put a frequently asked questions here at the beginning of the parent demographics section to help clarify some of the guidelines as to how you should fill it out if you're a mixed blended or divorced family. So there's some information about what if my parents live together, what do I have to provide? What if they're divorced or separated, and what does that mean? Etc. And so if you are a divorced family, you're a separated family, you're no longer living with a spouse, I would take time to read these frequently asked questions. And just as a general guide, let's say your parents are divorced, it's essentially who's going to fill out the FAFSA, and I'm just using this as a use case so that you get an understanding of kind of how some of these rules work, is if you're a divorced family, you're going to answer the first question, which is, who does the student live with the most? And so if that's a clear win, like let's say they live with the mom 75%, dad 25%, then it's going to be the mom that fills out the FAFSA. The dad's not going to fill it out. Now, if the mom is remarried, let's say, so the student has a stepdad now, then both of them are going to fill it out as a household. But the dad is not going to fill it out if they live the majority of the time with the mom. Now, if it's a clear 50-50 split, then you're going to go down to the next question, which is who financially supports the child the most. And then that's, again, the parent that's going to fill out the FAFSA, and if they're remarried, that family. There are some rules that will help you figure out who actually fills it out. And you can mess it up pretty bad if you don't read through those rules, because you may end up reporting the wrong parent, or you may end up trying to combine both the parents when they shouldn't be, etc. So it's pretty easy for like a married couple, but not so, or a single mom, single dad that's never been married. But if you've been married, divorced, separated, it can get a little more challenging. So make sure to read through this frequently asked questions section. It is going to ask about your marital status for the reasons I just outlined. And then if you're married, it's going to ask when you were married or remarried. And so you'll have to put the month and year. Then it's going to ask demographic information about the parents. It's going to ask for social security number, first name or last name, first initial. And I have no idea why they only ask for the first initial. This is very confusing to me, but it does only ask for the first initial. And this is different than the student, but it is what it is. I don't know why it asks it that way. And then it's going to ask for date of birth and then parents' email. If you have another parent that's putting in information, by the way, the FAFSA is smart. And so this wouldn't be the case if you said you were single, because it wouldn't be asking for parent two information here. But for those that maybe put married, you're going to have the other parent fill out their information here. And then it's going to ask the state of legal residence for the same reasons that I kind of outlined about the student on this question. So you're going to answer if you've lived there for at least 5 years in the state, the address that you just put in. And then here is a question that is different on parent demographics. And it's how many dependent children do your parents have? It's also going to ask about other dependents in the household. So you have to answer that. Then it's going to give you your household size on the next page. Again, the FAFSA is smart. It's going to calculate it as you go along. And it's going to ask how many do you have that are going to college? So it may only be one student, but it might be two. It might be two students plus maybe you're going to college as a parent. So you're going to put how many are going to be in college for that year that you're filling it out. Again, we're filling out 2023, 2024. So it's giving you that date range. And it's saying between these dates, how many are going to go to college. So you would answer that. And then we're done with another section. How about that? So we're already four sections through. We really have only 2 more to go, because we do have sign and submit, but this isn't really a section. It's just where you're going to be signing. So we only have two more to go. And actually, if you're an independent student, again, we're focusing on a dependent student scenario here, but then you've only got 1 more section. You're only going to have to fill out student financials, and then you're going to be done. So we're doing good. And hopefully some of the nerves are starting to fall away, because the FAFSA has become significantly easier to fill out than it was historically, and will get even easier next year, which is great. All right, so now we're to parent financials. And one of the great things about the FAFSA over the last 3 or 4 years is you can use something called the IRS data retrieval tool. So the IRS data retrieval tool, if you're eligible for it and if you're comfortable using it, will actually import your information directly from the IRS. And so now there are some tax scenarios, like if you filed married filing separately, you're not going to be eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool. And this makes sense when we think about it, because the government doesn't want a spouse that wants their tax information to be separate from another spouse to be pulling information from that spouse into the FAFSA. So, but most of you all, if you're, let's say, single or married, and you're going to have the married filing joint, you're going to have the ability to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So you're going to put your tax return status. By the way, the FAFSA is going to be taking tax information from 2 years prior. So we're filling out the 2023-2024 FAFSA, and it is going to use tax information from 2021. And you're actually seeing that right here. So it says, what type of income tax return did your parents file for 2021? That was 2 years ago in terms of this FAFSA. So you're going to put if you've already completed your taxes, most people have because it's 2 years ago. Then you're going to say, what type of return did you fill out? For most, it's going to be a Form 1040. And then it's going to say, what is your tax filing status? You can find that on your tax return if you don't know. A lot of people do know, though. So here it's saying married filing joint. And then there's going to be a pop-up that says, hey, congratulations, you're qualified to use the IRS data retrieval tool. You would either choose to skip that or to use the IRS data retrieval tool. It's going to make your life a lot easier if you choose to use it, by the way. And then you'll get the option to import the information. Then we're going to go to, and by the way, if you import some of your information from the IRS data retrieval tool, some of these will already be filled in and kind of grayed out. So that's the great thing, is it does all this for you. Not all of it, but a lot of it if you use IRS data retrieval tool. Then you're going to say, what is your adjusted gross income? And if you need to, you can look at the form, the tax form here. So you would go to Form 1040, line 11. Again, some of this might be imported in already. Then you're gonna, if you have two spouses, so like a married situation, which is what we're working with here, you would have to separate out what income is from one spouse versus the other. This is a calculation you have to do. This won't be listed on your tax return. Well, it'll be listed on your tax return, but you're gonna have to go through and add the numbers. So it's a little bit cumbersome, I guess, but this one likely will not be imported for you. Then again, the FAFSA is smart. So sometimes it will say, hey, based on what you've entered, you don't have to enter in for any other information. Congratulations. So would you like to proceed? And you can. But for other families, you're going to have to continue to answer information. And so if you don't skip the questions, or you're not offered the ability to skip the questions, you might have to answer questions about how much income tax you paid in 2021. Again, this might be imported, or you'll have to look at your tax return. And then there's some questions about untaxed income. So just to give you conceptual understanding of this, what we've just imported was basically your income that you made in 2021. So now what the Department of Education is asking are things that really wouldn't have shown up on your tax return that still have implications as to whether you have enough money to pay for college. So some of these, and I've seen a lot of families fill out the FAFSA, and a lot of them will go through all this, and none of these are specific situations that apply to them at all. And so they end up not filling out any of these. They're all zeros for them. Now, some of these may apply to you. For instance, you might have taken education tax credits, or if you don't now, maybe you're going to take it in a future year. You might have IRA deductions and payments to self-employed SEP and Simple and other retirement plans. You might have tax exempt interest. So if any of these apply to you, you're a clergy member, you get combat pay, all of these specific questions, you need to read through them and see if they apply to your situation. And again, in these instances, clicking on this helper icon here to get additional information might clarify some questions that you have. Additional parent info, again, child support, these are some of those untaxed income sections. Read through those to see if they are applicable to you. Child support, housing and other allowances if you're a clergy member, etc. So read through all those, see if they apply to your situation. So now we have filled out kind of all the income information from 2 years prior, but there are some questions that ask, as of today, what is going on with your asset situation? And so this is where we've gotten to that situation. So we've imported income information from 2 years prior, but the FAFSA looks at your income and your assets. And the asset questions are as of today. So here it's going to say, let's talk about assets for the family. And specifically, we're talking about parental information at this point. So it's going to say, as of today, what are your parents, or what is your father's total balance of cash, savings, checking accounts? So you're going to have to log into your checking accounts, your savings accounts. If you have cash under the mattress, you're going to have to calculate that all up. You're going to put it right here as of the day that you fill out the FAFSA. Then it's going to say, as of today, what's the net worth of your parents' investments, including real estate, but not your home. And by the way, the next slide, we're going to talk about investments and what's included and what's not. Then it's going to say, as of today, what's the net worth of your current businesses or investment firms? But please, this is another place where people can screw stuff up very easily. Look at what the next sentence says. It says, don't include a family farm or family business with 100 or fewer full-time or full-time equivalent employees. That is a huge business, okay? So a lot of you all will be running a business or maybe even a farm, but you're not going to have that type of employee count. So just know that this is a huge exception right here. And you don't want to list something that doesn't qualify. Now let's go back to this investments question, okay? So this is the guidance. If I were to click on this helper icon, I would get guidance about what is included in investments and what is not included. And I've put that in a really nice table for you here, okay? So what's included in this, by the way, this is another area where I see a lot of people make mistakes. So you need to know what's included and what's not included. So let's start with what's not included. So what's not included is the home in which you live. You don't have to report that at any time during the FAFSA. Also the value of life insurance, the value of ABLE accounts, which are accounts that are set up for special needs children. Retirement plans. So any of your retirement assets are not reportable on the FAFSA. You shouldn't log in and report your IRA as a part of investments. Why? Because the Department of Education doesn't see that as available to pay for college. They don't want to count that in your assets that are going to be liquidated. You're not going to liquidate your retirement account to pay for college. And then you don't report cash, checking, or savings accounts. Why? Because we just answered that in the previous question. So big thing to think of here. These are not included. Don't list this in the investment section. Then we do list things like real estate other than the house in which you live, rental property, trust funds, UGMA and UTMA accounts, money market funds, mutual funds, certificates of deposit. You can read all this stuff, but it's the typical things that we would think of as investments. The other thing too is qualified education benefit or education savings accounts. So thinking like 529, covered L accounts, those are always listed as parent assets, okay? So you will list the value of those accounts. But again, if you look at the note here, it says they must report, if you're a dependent student scenario, you're reporting parent financial information, you're going to list it as a parent asset. So that's another place where a lot of people can screw up, because this is actually an advantageous way to do it in terms of the FAFSA. I won't get into all the calculations and percentages, that would just bore you. But by listing it as a parent asset, it's actually helping you out on the FAFSA. So the department is essentially throwing you a bone, saying, hey, congratulations for saving for college. We're gonna put that here, but we're gonna do it in the best way possible. Then if you have any specific questions, you're always welcome to email me, but even on some specific investment questions, I refer people to the hotline. There is a hotline for the FAFSA. It's the same as you have a hotline for your taxes. You can call 1-800-4FED-AID. You can ask some of those specific questions directly to the department themselves. And guess what? That's the last place that we have to fill out financial information for parents. We're done with that section, and we get to move on to student financials. And surprise, surprise, it's the exact same. We're just answering those questions on behalf of the student now, not the parents. And so it's going to start with the same questions. What's your tax filing status? What's the form that you filled out? What's your tax status that you had, or your filing status in terms of your tax return? And by the way, if you have a dependent student, and that's the scenario that you're watching this, your student may have not filled out a tax return at all. They maybe worked a job, but they didn't make enough money to actually file a tax return. And if that's the case, you just put, hey, my student didn't fill out a tax return, and you move on. You won't be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool, but you could instead just put, oh, well, my student made $1,000 mowing lawns this year. You put that here and you move on. There's no tax return to refer to. There might be, but there might not be. Again, you're going to put their income from work. So here you had adjusted gross income, then you're going to do income from work, then you're going to have the amount of tax that they paid, if anything. Then you're going to move on to those same untaxed income sections. As you might imagine, these are probably a lot less relevant to your student than they are to you. So they're likely going to be putting a lot of zeros in these sections. If not all of them are going to be zero for the student. Untaxed income questions, and then they will have to ask questions about their assets. So if they have a checking account, if they have investments, heck, if they own a business of 100+ employees, they would have to list that here. But a lot of times it's just they're logging into their checking account. Okay, they have $500 at the bank down the street. They're listing that here as of today. And that's it. That's the FAFSA. That's all that you have to do. Then you get to sign and submit. And so what happens here, they're going to give you a confirmation screen that shows everything that you filled out. You check that for accuracy. You're also going to have to answer some kind of statistical questions, and then you'll also have to agree to kind of a disclaimer. As you might imagine, this is a government form, you would expect that. And then you're going to sign the FAFSA. So most of you all, since you're filling it out online, you can, by the way, fill out a PDF FAFSA and mail it in and sign it by ink if you wanted to do that, but most are going to fill it out online. So most that are doing it online are going to use the FSA ID to sign it electronically. You do have some other options, but know, like if you do a printed printed sign page and mailed it in, it's going to delay the processing of your FAFSA, as you might imagine, as your signature makes its way through the mail and gets to an actual person to process it. So many of you all are just going to sign with the FAFSA. The student's going to log in with their FSA ID at this point. They're going to sign it. And then the parent will do that as well to sign and verify parental information. Once that happens, you're done with the FAFSA. You'll get a confirmation screen that looks like this. So what's next? After a few days, your student's going to get an email saying, hey, congrats, your FAFSA processed. At that point, you could log in to view something called the student aid report, which is kind of a confirmation document that this is what you put into the FAFSA. There's also some additional information in there, so you can download that. But what happens afterwards is once your FAFSA processes, all the schools that you listed in the form are going to get that financial information. They're going to start compiling all the financial aid that you're eligible for. Not only that the government's going to give you from the FAFSA, but also that the school is going to give you through things like scholarships. And so they're going to put all that together in a document called the financial aid letter. They're going to send that to your student. Once they get admitted, once they go through the financial aid process for that school, that's when the financial aid letter will come. You'll see that hit mailboxes if it's mailed, or their dashboard likely if they're at a bigger school, and they'll be able to view what's the aid that they've gotten. And I can tell you that's the only time that you're going to be able to realize, okay, what's the full cost of attendance? What am I going to have to pay versus what am I actually getting? I get lots of calls at that time of year because people are like, hey, help us interpret this. And by the way, we have $10,000 we need every year. How do we make that work? And so you'll get that understanding when May comes. Another thing is, while you're waiting, you can check out the school's net price calculator, get an understanding of what the average family pays in your income bracket. That can be really helpful as well. So how do you get to that student aid report? Well, you'd log back into the FAFSA. You could click on view my student aid report, and you would be able to get a student aid report. And it just gives you information about your EFC and some other things. If you need to make corrections, again, that button is there as well. So you can click on that, make the corrections that you need to the sections that you need, and then you'll re-sign and submit the FAFSA. Now, additional resources for you all. Oh, by the way, you can see here that there's also the option to add and change schools, like I told you earlier. So that's where you would go to do that. All right, finally, I just want to give you some additional resources. Gradmetrics.com, my website. I've got a lot of blogs and different college planning topics, lots of student loan content there. So feel free to check that out if you want some additional information. I also have a podcast. It is grad-centric. You can find that on wherever podcasts are available, and you can check out some of those episodes. They're really short. I do like 5-minute episodes just on various college and student loan planning topics. So something that's easy to listen to on your commute to work or whatever makes sense for you. And then finally, after all these workshops, I always give you my contact information. Here it is. You can call or text that number. You can also email me at jason@gradmetrics.com, and I can follow up with some of the questions that you might have. So I'm going to turn it back over to the moderator and let them likely stop the recording here before we go to specific questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jason.